So back during his first term, from 2018 through to 2019, Trump had a bit of a fixation on the idea of the United States purchasing Greenland from the Kingdom of Denmark. And it seems that that idea is back at the front of his mind before he's even taken office again. Now, the idea of buying Greenland might sound insane, and I'm certainly not going to defend that idea. I think it's a pretty appalling one. But in this video, I want to try and explain why it is that Trump and people like him think that acquiring Greenland as a territory or a state, or however they envision it, would pragmatically be of benefit to the United States. So I should make some history clear first. Trump is nowhere near the first American to suggest buying, taking over, or annexing Greenland before. It's been an idea that's been rolling around since at least the end of World War II. At the time of the Second World War, both Iceland and Greenland were possessions of the Kingdom of Denmark. And when Denmark fell to the Germans, the Allies took steps to ensure that Iceland and Greenland would not fall into German hands. Iceland was primarily taken over by the British, and Greenland was basically taken over with a degree of consent from the people of Greenland by the United States. And in 1946, just after the war had wrapped up, when these territories were being returned to the Kingdom of Denmark, that the United States made its first offer for what would be more than $1 billion today to buy the territory of Greenland, which was soundly rejected by the Kingdom of Denmark. And it makes sense that their interest would kind of kick off there as the Second World War came to an end, because that's when the Cold War was kicking off. And a really important part of understanding the United States' interest in Greenland is where its location is and how that relates to Russia, or formerly the USSR. One of the most interesting maps, from my opinion, both for the Cold War and for today, is this map here of the North Pole, which gives you a very different perspective on the idea of tensions between the United States and Russia. As you can see, looking at this pole, you have Canada, you have Alaska as part of the United States, you have the entirety of Russia over that side, and then you have Greenland with a very strategically important position right there. And the US did kind of get its way in 1951 when the Cold War was like really ramping up. The Kingdom of Denmark and the United States came to an agreement that basically let the United States act in almost any way it wanted to militarily within Greenland, meaning that troops and weapons and artillery and anything could be placed there in preparation for any sort of polar combat with the Russians. So in a time where the Russians are really projecting their strength and trying to show how strong they are and that they aren't afraid to use force to achieve their goals, you can understand why the United States might want more of a presence on this frontier and want to actually control the territory of Greenland directly. But keeping that map up, a second very important consideration that isn't military is trade and money. Because of course, as the world does heat up, Greenland is going to melt a bit and will probably reveal more reserves of oil and coal. But most importantly, as the ice melts, this is all going to open up as a new trade route. And the United States wants a cut of those profits. Less ice here means it's easier to navigate, which means more ships, which means more trade, which means more bases, which means a lot more money in the, unfortunately, not too distant future. So those are the two real pragmatic reasons. It's economics and military. But there is an amount of ego in this that I think I would be remiss if I skipped over, really when it comes to discussing anything that involves Donald Trump. Because if Trump does acquire Greenland for the United States, be it through some treaty or like he says that he wants to buy it from Denmark, then that would be the largest single territorial expansion in the history of the United States. It would be bigger than the Louisiana Purchase in terms of new territory for the country. And look, unlike the Louisiana Purchase, most of that territory wouldn't be immediately farmable or really like economically super viable, but it would still be a big number and something that Trump would really, really like to have stamped on his resume and his legacy, I would imagine. But I do want to say that part of the reason that this always gets way more attention than like most other crazy pitches that come out of Donald Trump's mouth is the fact that purchasing Greenland has been so popular for such a long time because it's technically not impossible to think of actually playing out. Because it's incredibly unique how Greenland actually works. Because if you don't know, Greenland isn't technically a country per se. It is an autonomous region that is a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Basically, Denmark has over the years given Greenland more and more and more autonomy to operate less as a territory and more as like a pseudo country. Greenland has its own parliament, its own prime minister, it passes its own laws, but there are still some areas of responsibility that do fall to the Kingdom of Denmark itself. Primarily, the Kingdom of Denmark manages the foreign policy of Greenland and also provides defense, as Greenland doesn't have its own military. On top of all of that, Denmark also provides hundreds of millions of dollars to keep Greenland afloat. In fact, a majority of the revenue that Greenland's government takes in is just money given to them directly by Denmark. So it's not actually a independence for Greenland at the moment isn't really feasible because of how much they rely on Denmark's support to continue to properly function. So this is really where the modern idea of the United States taking over Greenland comes from. I mean, you take that situation that Greenland has, its relationship with Denmark, where Denmark provides the money to keep it afloat, it takes care of its foreign policy, and takes care of its defense policy. What if you keep things exactly the same in Greenland, except instead of all those things being provided for by Denmark, they're just provided for by the United States? So hypothetically, in this framework, Greenland would keep its prime minister, its parliament, all of its laws, its de facto autonomy. It's just that its benefactor would change from Denmark to the United States. The key issue with that plan, however, is that Greenland doesn't want fucking anything to do with it. As Greenland's prime ministers in the past and the present have made clear, they do not want to become part of the United States. And just ask yourself, why would they? The most spoken language in Greenland is Danish. Everyone who lives there is a Danish citizen, and the most common ethnicity there is mixed, indigenous, and Danish. These are people that have been in an association with Denmark or some part of Scandinavia for 800 years now, and you can't just shatter all of that cultural history. Because, look, Trump's demands to make Canada part of the United States are very much being interpreted as jokes, and I'm going to interpret them that way as well, because nobody is taking them seriously. But wanting Greenland, on the other hand, that has been government policy on and off since the end of World War II. It is something that is actually taken seriously, and I have a suspicion as to why. Because Trump does not bring up the fact that people in Greenland are so opposed to that idea. And it just rings true of this history of, oh, there's a big territory where the people that live there are primarily indigenous, and we want that territory. We can have that territory. Regardless, whatever you think the contributing factors are to why Trump seems so focused on the idea of attaining Greenland for the United States, I get the sense that with the amount of support he has now from the Republican Party, the power they have in Congress, and the support that he broadly has amongst conservatives, I don't think this idea of purchasing Greenland is going to go away anytime soon during his term.